Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Stef. Stef, welcome to the show. Thank you for making time for us today.
I'm absolutely honoured to be invited. It's wonderful to be here and to see you again.
Yeah, wonderful to see you too, my friend. So listeners, we've done a couple of these. And the kind of like the conversations with coaches. So coaches who are have no lived experience of adoption, but have I think a gift for seeing the truth about how kind of life works. And that sounds really grandiose. It just happens to be my belief that that's true, right? So I've known Stef a couple of years. We've had conversations on off, and there's a real depth and clarity to what he talks about. So about 6 weeks ago, I was thinking about my podcast and thinking about adoption about 5 o'clock one morning. And I was thinking about, this idea that I had that, well, it was more than an idea, it was a belief really. So it was a belief that came into my head. That hung around for a bit, that adoption had screwed me up. Really, that was a thought that I had for a while, and I hadn't had that before. I know where it came from, and it came from reading the Primal Wound, which is a book about this stuff. And I thought, well, I had this kind of like, it sounds really strange to say, but the idea that I had was on the back of that. Well, but I'm not my beliefs. I'm not, we are not our beliefs. Our beliefs, we believe them. We believe our beliefs, don't we? We think that they're true. We think that they're the truth of that. And I thought, well, who could I chat to about that for the podcast? And my first guy that popped into my head was Stef. So that's the kind of background for the conversation, Stef. So what do you make of all that?
Well, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is before we talk about what beliefs are and how we experience them, I just wanted to say that anything that we talk about in this conversation is not in any way trying to belittle or demean the experience of people that have been through adoption and any trauma that might have come out of that. The way that we experience life, the way that we have been culturally taught to see situations and our place in it and the meaning we make of it is it's innocent, it's natural, it's a product of our conditioning, product of our cultural conditioning. And unless we have a deeper understanding of how life works, of how our experience is created, and of who we really are, then we're going to suffer from our beliefs, from our experiences in life that are traumatic for us. That's innocent. That's absolutely innocent. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm clearly a bit gung-ho on all this stuff. So thank you for the softening there that you did. Essentially, it's not our fault, right? We are innocent in this, as you say, and that means that I had because I've been looking at this like you for quite a while. I remember having an idea, a realization a few years ago. My feelings aren't my fault, and our feelings aren't our behalf, aren't our fault. It's not anybody's fault. We're not at fault. We are innocent, and our beliefs aren't our fault either, because we have picked them up from the world around us. So the metaphor for this that is often used is the sponge. As kids, we're sponges, and we soak up the beliefs of the people around us. We soak them up. We soak them up, and or we inherit the beliefs. So we inherit them clearly. So soaking up the beliefs, that could be soaking up from the atmosphere, the environment. That might be something at school, something in the playground, something at our sports ground. If we're playing little league baseball in the States, or mini soccer here in the UK, or it might be inherited, as in we inherit stuff from our parents, our families, and friends. So it's what people call, as you say, cultural conditioning or programming, and we haven't got the remote control for that program. We don't. We soak that up from the world around us. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way of describing it. And I suppose in my own case, I wasn't adopted, but I had, I had some programming from, I think I went to school from the age of 4. And I'm trying not to make this too long, but it was a very religious Catholic school. The other children were older than me, a lot bigger than me, and I was very, very small, and I had a really, really long, unpronounceable second name, Cybichowski, and I was a prime target. I think kids of that age have a tendency to pick on the smallest, the most vulnerable of the tribe, and I was it. And so I went through a period of time before I went to school. I was a happy. I was really outgoing. I liked people. I really enjoyed life. But when I went to school at the age of 4 and was on the receiving end of all this negative attention, not just from the other kids, but from the teachers and from family, who basically in those days, because it was a very long time ago, would say things like, no, you got to stiff up a lip, you've got to stand up to it, you've got to fight back. And it didn't feel to me like there was any support. And I began to take on board all that cultural belief that I am vulnerable, I am sensitive, I cry a lot, I'm not as good as everybody else. I can't do this and I can't do that. And so that experience from the age of 4 formed a belief and a conditioning that I wasn't good enough, that I would always be behind the curve. And it affected my academic studies. It affected how I showed up at sports day, I became very shy and very insular and very afraid of being seen.
Yeah. So the first thing that popped into my head was that, and I'm showing my age here, the guy that, there was a TV show, This Is Your Life. You remember that, the story? So they'd bring in, they'd surprise a celebrity.
Yeah.
And it'd say, I won't try and do the Irish accent, but it'd say, you know, they'd surprise a celebrity, and then the guy, the host would tell the story of his life, bringing in all his friends and family, and all her friends and family, and they had a book, didn't they, that This Is Your Life, and say, and they used to say, and the people taking the mickey out of him used to say, and of course you were born at an early age. Like me, I think you were, it was pretty clear that you were a lover, not a fighter.
Absolutely, yeah.
You're a lover, not a fighter.
Yeah.
This sensitivity and this vulnerability that we have, and this sense of being different and not fitting in, and a lot of this stuff, as I have talked to many people, adopted and non-adopted, it starts as kids, as when we're bullied. So bullies make it about us. They find out what's different about us. So in my case, in your case, it was your name, your surname. And you'll notice, listeners, that I didn't try and pronounce it either. I just said, "Hi, Stef." So I know that it's
I completely missed that, Simon.
Did you? Okay. I've rumbled myself. So bullies make it about us. So I got bullied for I didn't get bullied about being adopted because people didn't know. I got bullied for my name as well, actually. Well, kind of, but it was more to do with, me having buck teeth, so teeth that stood out, like so a Bugs Bunny, and Ratty and Rodent Boy, and all those sorts of like emotional sort of taunts and stuff. And I was bullied. I was bullied on scout camp because I didn't drink tea, because I went to a posher school. You know, they make it about us. And what happens, as far as I can tell, is, or you know, as far as I can, what from my own experience, is the external bully becomes an internal bully. So that's what conditioning is. Conditioning sounds a bit psychological, but yeah, the external bully that says that we're not good enough, that we don't fit in because we've got buck teeth, or because we've got an unpronounceable name, or we're not good at sports. That the external bully moves into our own head, and we start to believe we believe that we're not good enough. And then from what I can tell is then we kind of like, but we pin a tail, we pin the not good enough tail on a donkey, and it is something, it's to do with what makes us different.
Yeah, I that feels completely true to me. And I think what we do, you know, in our case, it was bullies that kind of made that particular story look true to us in our head, not being good enough. But I think that what happens is, pretty much with every human being, is at some point, if it's not a bully, it might be a parent, or it might be a teacher, or it might be, you know, society saying you're the wrong color, or you're the wrong gender, or whatever. There's something that we take on board as being true about our identity. Even the bullies kind of have that not good enough story going on in their head, and one of the reasons they become bullies is they're playing out some kind of way of trying to feel better about themselves. So to me, what happens is, at a certain age, usually at the age we begin to take on board familial and cultural signals, we create this idea of ourselves, we create this identity, which, you know, in the terms we can call the ego, you know, what we think about ourselves at any given time is just the ego. And the problem with the ego is, because it's made up of all this psychology, it's made up of all these different influences, generally the things that stick are the negative ones, you know. The things that stick are the I am lacking, I am not good enough, I will never be good enough, I am not lovable. All those things are the things that strike deep into our psyche. And what happens is, the way that psychology works is, when we get eyes for something, you know, like when you know, you want to buy a new car and you don't see any on the road, then all of a sudden you've decided, I want to buy that car and I want it to be in red. All of a sudden you see so many of those cars. Once you get eyes for something, it becomes the truth.
Yeah. So
once we have a belief, it becomes a narrative. It becomes a script, a habit that plays in our head like a ticker tape. Oh yeah, I know. That's yeah. I'm always like that. I've always been like that. It never works for me. I can't do that. It becomes a habit. It's not just a one-off thought anymore. It becomes something that we believe. It's something that looks real to us. And because it plays constantly in the background, we begin to live life from that point of view. We begin to live life through that lens of not good enough. So for me, you know, when I was bullied at primary school, I was bullied at senior school, I was such a willing victim, you know, and then, but it didn't, you know, when I went to college and when I went to work, I still saw myself and my life through the lens of not good enough. Through that script that kept playing on in my head, through the cultural conditioning, through the brainwashing that I'd had.
Yeah.
That I had, you know, sort of willingly bought into and kept repeating.
Willingly, but innocently.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, because we don't know anything better, do we? We don't know how our mind works.
No. So the conditioning, and you've used all these different metaphors because it's hard to grasp this. It's hard to grasp this stuff, listeners. So we're kind of like, who was it? Was it? So I met Stef through a mutual mentor called Michael Neill. Was it Michael that talked about the putting metaphors being like putting bandages on the invisible man? Yeah. So the invisible man, you can't see him because he's invisible. That's the whole point. It would be a really terrible invisible man if he was visible. So what we're doing here is we're taking stuff that is invisible, and it's also hard to grasp, right? It's hard to get our heads around stuff because we can't see it. We're talking about ephemeral sound, ephemeral sounding concepts. And what we're doing is, what Stef's doing is, because of his gift, is giving you different metaphors. And because that is like putting clothes on the invisible man, or a bandage on the invisible man. So in the film, you know, when he put his suit on, he was quite a slick dude, one in his 70s kind of suit and a shirt and tie. And then, but he couldn't, obviously, he couldn't cover his face with a balaclava, or would people think he was going to do a bank job? So he wrapped his head in bandages, and the story was that he's recovering from bad burns or an accident, so what metaphors do are they put the clothes on the invisible man. They take what is invisible and make it visible. And the idea, a metaphor that came to my mind last week was in the kind of a metaphor for the trauma of being adopted, or any sort of trauma, was an avalanche. So it starts small. An avalanche starts small. It's just a one little tiny piece of snow, and it gets bigger. It snowballs, and then it starts to pick up other stuff, everything in its wake. So it picks up rocks, it picks up trees, small bushes and trees, and it gets more and more powerful. And for me, that's what these beliefs do, and that's what this conditioning does. And so it gets worse, because what the people say, what the thinker thinks, the prover proves. So the mind is like a meaning-making machine, and it's looking for more and more evidence. All right, well, that's because I'm adopted. That's because I'm adopted. That's because I'm adopted. And I think about that myself, and how, like an emotional moment. I'm kind of a bit embarrassed to say this, but I was 13 and I got dropped. I was in the rugby club, a rugby team, for 4 or 5 years. And then it got to the new rugby season, and I was dropped from the team. And I remember 12, 13, and I was crying. I wasn't bawling my eyes out, but I turned away. I didn't want anybody to see the tears of being no longer good enough to be in the team, being rejected. And you could say, well, that's an adoption thing, Simon. Well, maybe, maybe not. But if once this avalanche of conditioning and beliefs start gathering pace, it's unstoppable. It becomes an unstoppable force. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, where's the hope in that? Where's the hope in that metaphor, Simon? And then I remembered something that I saw in a queue for a ski lift a few years ago. So there were some guys in the queue. I think they were Austrian, Germans, not sure which. It doesn't really matter. But one of them had this avalanche rucksack on. So what happens with this avalanche rucksack is it looks like a normal rucksack, but it's got a logo on it. I can't remember what the logo is. If you are about to be engulfed by the avalanche, you pull the cord, and it sets off a little dynamite charge, and you are basically ensconced in a big round inflatable ball. So if you, a bit like an airbag. So when an airbag goes off in the car, it goes off and it goes off and it deflates straight away, and stops you hitting your head on the windscreen or whatever it is, and it cushions the blow. And that's what this That's what this avalanche rucksack did. And I thought, that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing on the podcast today. We're giving you an insight that is the first kind of cushioning against this avalanche of trauma that's been running for you,
yeah.
And it runs for all of us.
Yeah.
This is adoptees do not have the monopolies on avalanches.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I love that. I love that.
Because it sticks. It sticks. The reason the avalanche thing popped into my head is it sticks, doesn't it? The snow sticks to us.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Like, yeah, it sticks to us. Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, no, it was, yeah. So for me, I kind of grew up with this idea that I wasn't good enough. I had low self-esteem, and there was no way out. It was just who I was. And it carried into my, sort of relationships. And, when my marriage broke down, that was because I wasn't, because I wasn't good enough. That was, I entirely took the whole blame on myself because of the way that I saw myself. And life took on a very dark turn, and there were a lot of things that happened around that time that my whole life kind of seemed to fall apart. And at some point, the Michael Neill, the guy you were talking about earlier, when I first came across Michael's books, after having like a very dark period where there was some suicidal ideation, I didn't want to carry on. I couldn't see how life could get any better. It just looked like life was going to get worse and worse. It was this big black hole. And then I came across a book by Michael Neill called The Inside Out Revolution. It talked about the teachings of a guy called Sydney Banks. And basically, what Sydney Banks saw was that our experience of life, 100% of our experience of life is being created through our thought in the moment. So anything that we think that looks true to us in any moment is what we feel. And then if what we feel in the moment looks true to us, that's what we believe. Another day or two might pass, and that thought may no longer be there. We may no longer be in the state of mind that created that thought. And then life that we experience in that moment can be different. So what I saw was that in the times that I was depressed, and I saw that I was not good enough and that life wouldn't get any better, I felt like committing suicide. In an hour's time, in a day's time, I could be thinking something completely different, and life would feel okay. It's not like, oh, I am this person and this is the situation in my life. This is how I have to feel all the time. I saw that my feelings, my state of mind, my emotions changed from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day. They weren't the same. They were transient.
Yeah.
They came and went. But the situation was the same. You know, I was still divorced from my wife. I was still a single parent. I was still having to take care of my dying father. All the things that were the circumstances around that time in my life that I was depressed about, I went through, I had different experiences of it. So I began to see that my beliefs, my conditioning, that habitual script that I had about me not being good enough, about me having low self-esteem, about me not being very bright, I just began to see a glimmer that, oh, maybe that's not true. Maybe that belief that I have of myself is coming from a conditioning that goes back to when I was 4, you know, that's just been, but it's not, in itself, it's not true, because I'm not always depressed. I'm not always thinking about how rubbish I am. I used to have this, right, this shows you how insane this was. I used to have this thing about being really shy and being really scared, being in a party, and I didn't want to be seen. But at the same time, I'd been a musician since I was 12, and I was a professional musician. I would go out on stage, and sometimes I would be the only person on stage with hundreds and thousands of people watching me. I didn't have that feeling then. I wasn't shy then. It kind of dawned on me that that belief that I had about myself was not true. The thinking that we have about ourselves, every single human being, is not true. It's something that we've bought into, and it's something that changes from moment to moment.
So going back to Sid, so Sid's no longer with us, listeners, unfortunately. He died a while ago. The interesting, well, one of the interesting things about Sid is Sid was adopted. Sydney Banks was adopted. He never spoke into anything about adoption. And I don't know how I picked up, but I also thought it was really strange because I don't know what his middle name was, or even if he had a middle name, but it's got the same initials as me, Sydney Banks and Simon Penn. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So you've heard the story about how the question from a psychologist that was the catalyst for Sid seeing this. Do you want to share that with the listeners?
Sure. So in Sid's early days, when his marriage when he was having challenges in his marriage. I think this was like the early 70s. So him and his wife were going through some challenges, and the fashion at the time was to go for these group therapy sessions where people would they would be encouraged to shout at each other, encouraged to do all sorts of stuff that we look back on now and think, well, that's not really helpful, is it? and so one day he kind of got a bit fed up of shouting at his wife, and he was known, he had this idea of himself as being insecure. Insecurity was his big thing. He was insecure about everything. So went out for a walk one day with a psychologist friend of his, and Sid said something like, I just, you know, I am just insecure about everything. It's the worst thing about my life. I really see myself as insecure. And this psychologist said to Sid, quite innocently, you know, said, "You're not insecure, Sid. You just think you are." Now, Sid saw that on a way deeper level than the psychologist had said it. You know, the psychologist had said it in quite a pass away, you know, sort of passing kind of way of trying to describe what he saw. But what Sid saw, it stopped him. And he then had a period of time where basically he began to see how insecurity is thought, how depression is thought. About every single part of the human condition is created by thought. And how powerful the principle of thought is, because it can create our whole reality. Whatever we are thinking in any moment that looks real to us, we feel.
And he described thought as the missing link, didn't he? That's one of his books, Thought is the Missing Link.
Yeah.
And the way I see this in adoption, in the world of adoption, and my experience, right? Just my experience is that I was adopted 55 years ago. Okay. My level of security has been up and down in those 55 years.
Yeah.
So it can't be the adoption itself, because the adoption is a fixed, or, you know, you could say, well, Simon, it's to do with being relinquished. It's nothing about, you know, your mum and dad. It's about being relinquished by your birth mother, right? So when I say adoption, I'm rolling relinquishment into adoption, dear listeners. So my level of insecurity has been up and down, all over the shop. I almost swore then. All over the shop in 55 years, right? So that it has varied. But adoption is something, it was a fixed event in the past. So a fixed event in the past cannot be the cause of a variable experience of insecurity. A fixed thing can't cause a variable thing. A past thing can't cause a current thing. There must be something else at play. There must be another factor. There must be a missing link. And that missing link is, as Sid said, is that right? He describes thought as the missing link. Is that
Yes.
right? If I remember it. Yeah.
So,
It's a long time since I read the book.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
So thought is the missing link. And what we are not advocating here is to think positive, if you ever like, because we've all tried that. You know, the world, the internet world is full of people telling us that if we change our thoughts, then we will change our reality, and therefore we should just think positive. Essentially, that's it. You know, and then what do people say? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. You know, if we the what do they call it, the secret, you know, if you're not getting wanting what you want in your life, then you need to manifest it by thinking good thoughts. We're not talking about any of that, are we?
No. So the way it looks to me is that what really saved me was seeing that I wasn't my thoughts. I wasn't who I believed to be. So if I'm not my thoughts, who am I? And what I found was, when I looked in that direction, who are we really? What happens when I've got a snow globe here? It's kind of so what happens is we have our.
He's got a butter in. He's got a butter in the snow globe. It's like Goldie Flex. Cool.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the noise of our thinking. That's how we live most of our life in this, you know, information-driven age. We have lots and lots of thinking, and we're thinking about stuff all the time. That's not how we're designed. When we understand that we are not the thoughts that we believe, we are not the beliefs, then what happens is the snow settles, our thinking settles, our mind slows down. When our mind slows down and our thinking settles, life looks different. When our thinking settles and our mind slows down, we begin to get clarity. We begin to see things from a different perspective. You know, it's like being able to see the wood for the trees. We're not lost in this noise of and ticker tape of habitual thinking and current thinking. And when our mind is allowed to settle, when it's allowed to slow down, when we recognize what we're doing to ourselves, when we're gripped, you know, it's like, I'm hitting myself. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Let's stop hitting myself. Let's just take a step back. Then what happens is, and it's exactly what you were talking about with the snowball and the bubble. The way it looks to me is like we get some bubble wrap that gives us some distance between us and our thinking. When we see that it's not who we are, when we see that it's not real, when we see that these uncomfortable feelings we're having are not saying anything about what's happening in the world, it's just saying what's happening in our head, then we can take that step back, which allows the mind to settle. When we can see that we aren't what we're thinking, when we can see that the thinking comes and goes, then it makes more sense to have a relationship with what doesn't come and go. What doesn't come and go is a deeper part of us that's underneath the thinking. The deeper part of us that is where feelings of love and compassion and inspiration and joy, they're not from the intellect, they're from who we are before our thinking. That's clarity comes from that space. And that part of us, that deeper part of us, doesn't come and go. All things intellectual, sometimes they can be useful, but it all comes and goes. What doesn't come and go is that part of us that is beyond the intellect. That part of us is responsive. That part of us is the part of us that finds answers to questions. It's the part of us that can find solutions. It's the part of us that allows us to navigate our life in a much more graceful way. Not to say we don't get caught up in the intellect. That's human, we do that. But there's something for me about knowing that there is a deeper part of us that does not come and go. No matter how much we shake our snow globe, there is a part of us that cannot be touched, cannot be destroyed, cannot be changed. And that part of us, that space, is all we have to do to touch that space is to take a step back.
Beautiful. And we experience this, right? We get glimpses of it. So as you were talking, I was thinking about a time on holiday about, 20 years ago. And I think it'd been a hectic day, like maybe I'd been at work in the morning or trying to do stuff. And then, so it was a late afternoon flight. And we walked into, we'd arrived at the flat, and we'd walked through the little winding back streets of this Greek village, and come into the square where we used to go to this restaurant, taverna thing. And as I sat down, I felt the weight of my thinking lifting off my shoulders. So it's that, and I was engulfed in peace. It didn't last very long, but I was engulfed in peace. So this is something that we all, it happens to all of us. Something takes our breath away. We stop for a rest when we're walking the dog, or it happens to us, or we're listening to, we're lost in music in the car on the route to work, or whatever. We touch that peace. We have that fleeting moment of peace, and then it's gone. But all we want in our life is peace and contentment, and that sort of happiness. And that's who we are, and that's what we touch. But we only touch it fleetingly, and we don't know that that is us, because nobody's ever told us.
It's not in the How to Do Life book, is it?
Well, it wasn't in my. It was definitely wasn't on my degree course. No. It was organizational sociology, industrial psychology, and economic and social history. It wasn't in my O levels. It wasn't covered. It wasn't covered. Nobody tells us the really important stuff.
But like you say, everybody has had an experience of it. We kind of, our day-to-day life is going through a continuum. And you can call it state of mind. You can say, okay, we further up, the faster our mind is going, we're trying to figure stuff out, we're trying to work stuff out, we're thinking, we're ruminating, and then at some point, the continuum will go down, and we will slow down a little bit, and then at some point it'll go back up again, at some point it'll go down a little bit further, and then there'll be a nice feeling. That's what Sid used to call it. He said it always comes with a good feeling. And that's, I think we all use the word feeling differently. But I think we all, we might not necessarily feel deep peace and complete clarity all the time, but there are times when we're just in a good feeling for no reason at all. That's because we're on that part of the continuum, if you like. So for me, what made the biggest difference to my life was knowing that I wasn't who I thought I was, how I believed something that was created. It was something that wasn't true, and I bought into. And the other thing was knowing that if I wasn't that thinking, when I wasn't in that thinking, I was in this incredibly resourceful, clear state. Things made sense to me. There was answers came easily, and I felt compassionate, I felt kind, I felt loving to my fellow man. That, knowing that is there underneath the noise, made all the difference to me. It changed my life. It allowed me to see miracles where I hadn't seen them before. It allowed me to have a much deeper experience of life, a richer experience of life. It allowed me to have my feelings, but not suffer from them. I could feel pain, but I didn't suffer quite so much.
Yeah. Beautiful. So, listeners, as always, if you want to check out the extra special guests that we have on the show, then always check out the show notes, and I'll put a link to Stef's socials on there. And thank you for sharing a bit of piece with us and giving us a glimpse of this stuff this afternoon, Stef. It's been beautiful.
Bless you, Simon. I'm so honoured that you kind of invited me to be here today. I just love spending time with you.
Cheers, buddy. Thanks again. Speak soon.